democracy is more than a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living. The roots of democracy are to be searched in the social relationship, in the terms of associated life between people who form a society. So today in this panel, we will hear some experiences from India, Bangladesh, and Nepal about how a formal application of democracy keeps up with Dr. Ambedkar's and actually all of our expectation to create a society, a diverse one, with fair social relationship that coexist next to each other. So I'm gonna invite all of the speakers and introduce them. We have Krishna Bhattacharya, sociologist, Lawyer Association for Human Rights of Nepalese Indigenous People. Please come to the stage. We also have Jaspreet Mahal, Fulbright Master Fellow, Sustainable International Development, Women and Gender Study in Brandeis University. We have Adiba Nasser, a master student also in the program of Sustainable International Development, Brandeis University. And Nidhi Sen, Fulbright Master Fellow, joined MA in Sustainable International Development and Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies, Brandeis. So, we will be done by around 12:15 for the lunch. So each presenter will be given around 15 minutes presentation, and all of the questions, all of the audiences will be given opportunity to ask questions after all of the presentations done. We will have around 15 to 20 minutes discussion after all of the presentations. I will be sitting over there giving you this sign for you to be able to track the time. And I will give the first opportunity to present to Krishna Bhattacharya, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, and I'm very happy to be here in this panel where most of my speakers are all bright, not only quarter bright, not even half bright. Most of us are full bright. I was also full bright from 1987 to 1992 at the University of California at Berkeley, and previously at the Stanford University. So it's to be part of the brightest of the bright. Well, my topic is, as you can see, religion and representative secular democracy. It's a case of Nepal. And you know, Nepal is a very diversified country. Actually, it's like New York. If you want to interview any people who speak their mother tongue, you don't go to their original place. You better go to New York. You can find all of them there. So Nepal is also a country of very diversified in many sense. It's a multi-caste, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious, and multicultural society. You can see in figures our census, which I call actually, it's a manufactured, Central Department of Manufactured Figures, right? It's not the Central Bureau of Statistics. They manufactured number. And even the manufactured number are 127, but we believe that we have not yet done any caste, ethnic and linguistic survey, so we exactly don't know how many caste, ethnic groups or linguistic groups exist in Nepal. Perhaps it may be a few decades to know that. But by rough estimate, dominant caste areas, there are 6 different castes, Dalits. It keeps increasing. By now it is 33. 7 in the hills and 26 in the Tarai. Indigenous peoples, 59, but there are more than 59 indigenous peoples in Nepal. Madesi, it depends on how you calculate. There are indigenous peoples, there are Muslims, there are, even the hill people who live in Tarai, and there are Hindu caste groups. So the Madhesi scholars and activists, they think that there are altogether 56 different castes, but that may overlap with Dalits, that may overlap with indigenous peoples, and so on. And Muslims, they have internal 27 communities. The total number of languages and dialects, we have 123. And Caste Nepali is the dominant language. In terms of race or caste and ethnicity, the Caste Aryas are the dominant caste groups. And then in terms of religion, our previous session identified around 7, but the number keeps changing. But we do have all kinds of religion that we find in different parts of the world. But again, Hindu religion is the dominant religion. Now, let me say very quickly about inequality, discrimination, and democracy in Nepal. Well, inequality and discrimination against minorities, including religious minorities, and indigenous peoples, Dalits in Nepal are much higher than Chomolungma, that is the real name. Fake name is Mount Everest. And another fake name is Sagarmatha in Nepali. So we need to appreciate the real name, right? Barack Obama did that about the mountain in Alaska. So it is higher than those mountains. And then the representative secular democracy, if you talk about democracy and then secular democracy and then representative secular democracy, forget about much desired self-determined inclusive secular democracy. But let's talk just about representative secular democracy. In Nepal is much lower than Kechana. Our lowest point is 70 meters above the sea level. So democracy is sliding down, and then inequality and discrimination is soaring up. So it's a very tragedy actually. In terms of religious groups, the fake data shows Hindus are 80.6 in 2001, 81.3. But if you look at the census data, they always show between 80 to 90%, which is not right. Because indigenous peoples and others comprise more than, majority population who don't believe in Hinduism. So it's a manufactured number. Christians, they were just 5 in 1950, but now it is shown 0.5% in 2001 and then 1.4% in 2011. But because of proselytization, and then the harassment against the Christians, that is a state policy, and the law is also like that. So many Christians, they don't want to expose themselves as Christians. It's like the LGBTI coming out of closet. So religious groups also need to come out of their closet. Nepal's minorities, including religious groups, experience, to understand it, we need to look at the brief historical critical overview. And basically we have to understand that Nepal has been dominated, guided, directed, and everything decided by Brahmanism. In Nepali we say Bahunba, but the Brahmins, they don't like to hear that word. So Brahmanism is very much anchored on Hindu religion and in both public and private spheres. And so the issue of secularism, the debates about secularism, and the need and desire for secularism emerged actually after 1990 because it was believed a little bit politically more comfortable to raise those issues. Actually the problem, it's a dilemma. Nepal accepts Western model of democracy, that too very much inappropriate one. British parliamentary form of democracy, British parliamentary form of political system in Nepal. So it's a Western model of democracy. It is accepted, but when secularism comes, then they reject it. Because that part of Western culture is, political culture is okay, but secularism as another culture or idea is not okay. So they want very selective acceptance and selective rejection, depending on what suits them to perpetuate the Brahmanism against Dalits or indigenous peoples or Madesis or others in Nepal. And also, the second is that they as long as caste-based discrimination, including untouchability, that's the worst form of human rights or violation of human rights, then actually it's a crime against humanity also. How can one person become untouchable to another person, and who decides and how long, right? They remain untouchable. In Nepal, actually, Dalits are permanent untouchables and women are temporary untouchables. Women are also not spared. They become untouchable every 4 or 5 days, every month, and also when they give birth to the child. So, as long as untouchability exists, as long as caste-based discrimination exists, there can be no democracy in Nepal. But there can be some kind of claimed representative democracy, but that democracy is not democracy. In between the letters D-E-M-O, we have to add the N actually. That becomes democracy, not the democracy. And then there is no representative secular democracy, but representative secular democracy is minimal, but the optimal. For Dalits, I think that's okay as far as the leaders and activists of that movement is concerned. They are fine until now with the representative secular democracy, but I'm sure that in future they will also move up to self-determined secular inclusive democracy as demanded by indigenous peoples and the Madhesis. When I say Madhesis, again, there are around 27 Dalit caste within the Madhesi group. My focus of presentation is on brief historical overview and also the practices and debates. So about the brief historical overview, rule through the customary institution, which is equivalent to right to, self-determination. But Gautam Buddha was the first who fought against caste-based discrimination. That was rampant, pervasive during his time in the Indo-Gangetic plain, part of India, northern India, and part of Nepal. He fought against those kinds of evils by putting forward the theory of impermanence, law of cause and effect. Actually, scientists believed in cause and effect from 16th centuries onwards, but Gautam Buddha was very much convinced that there is nothing like divine things, there is nothing like after life thing, there is nothing like before life thing. Whatever is there is cause and effect. Every cause has effect, every effect has its cause. So he was very scientific actually, for that matter. It was not a religion per se also. It was basically science, and he prescribed fourfold truth. He believed in fourfold truths and then eightfold paths for emancipation. The worst part was when King Jayasthiti Balla, that is the time when Colombo discovered, quote unquote, discovered America. I keep joking that if Columbus had discovered America, I discovered Brandeis day before yesterday, actually. And you should make note of that. Don't forget to mention. So, Jayasthiti Balla introduced 64 castes based on descent, not on descent but on work in Kathmandu. But it was based on the advice given by 5 Brahmins invited from India. And that gradually evolved into hierarchy, purity, impurity, and untouchability within the indigenous peoples called Nevards. Territorial unification was done by King Prithvinaran Shah, and his mission was to make Asali Hindustan, meaning original Hindustan being Nepal, and India being the fake Hindustan, fake India. And making Nepal a guardian of 4 castes and 36 Varna, if you would have answered in the objective test in my class, he would have failed, because it should not be 4 castes and 36 Varna, but 4 Varna and many castes. And then he was dead against the Christians. He wanted to stop. That's why in Nepal, until now, Christians have little influence. All over the world, among the indigenous peoples, Christians have more influence. And in Nepal, Dalits were also not influenced much before, but now, many Dalits and then indigenous peoples are accepting Christianity. But in Nepal, the reason Christians were at bay was because of this policy that began in 1768 actually. Janga Bahadur Rana was the first to enact Muluki Ain which is called the Civil Code in 1854. That was the first ever constitution or law in the written form. But what it did was it totally relied on Hindu religion, Hindu culture, and Hindu societal norms, right, and values. So they restructured the society legally into 4 categories: Tagadari, sacred thread wearing, or twice born. The Brahmin Kshatris are thought to be born twice. We all are born once, but they are born twice. And then Matwali, people like me, were called liquor drinking caste, indigenous peoples. And then there were 2 other categories: water unacceptable but purification not required. Oh, sorry, okay. And then untouchables. Punishment was totally relied on who belonged to which caste. Democracy, we had very short-lived democracy, basically from 1950 to 60 and 1990 onwards. But most of the time, we had one or the other kind of dictatorship. So religion, dictatorship, Hindu religion and dictatorship have been quite synonymous. So we cannot think of representative secular democracy in that situation. People's movement of 1990 regained multi-party democracy and constitutional monarchy, but it was not different from the previous political values and norms and practices actually. It was for the first time during the making of the 1991 constitution, 200,000 people marched in the streets of Kathmandu demanding for secularism. But their voices were not heard until the introduction of interim constitution in 2007, which declared Nepal as a secular country. But in 2005, they reverted back to the Hindu state. Although Nepal has been declared as a secular country, but the explanation said that secular means protection of religion and culture being practiced since ancient times. That means Dalits, caste-based untouchability is constitutionally recognized as a traditional practice that can go on unabated. That's terrible. Okay, about the practices, though Dalits and Madhesis belong to Hindu caste system, they also want secularism. And then many Dalits have changed to Christianity, as Ambedkar also didn't want to die as a Hindu. He was also very much against the Marxist ideology also. Same is the case in Nepal. But many indigenous peoples also have adopted Christianity. Now in Nepal there are basically analysis of practices and debates related to representative secular democracy is that there is a separation of religion and state, politics or freedom of religion, and equal citizenship. Those are the basic core values of democracy. But there are different positions. Basically, like in terms of separation of religion, state, politics, religion as a private affairs or differentiation of religions from political institutions, the educated, conscious leaders, activists defend that position, but the rulers, they say that these all are Western imports. There is freedom of religion, but the freedom of religion has actually translated into domination, so there is no freedom as such. Rajiv Bhargava talks about principal distance, but that principal distance is also not politically correct in Nepal and not in favor of the Dalits emancipation or other marginalized groups emancipation. The constitution is very much against it, racist. Let me finish here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Katachan, for the presentation. It was really interesting. For the next presentation, I invite Jasprit Mahal. We will be presenting implication of decentralization process in Haryana, India.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. I would really thank you for taking your time out and being here. I'm Jasprit and I'm presenting on implications of decentralization of power in the state of Haryana. Haryana is a northern state in India. Looking at decentralization, but a step back, what is governance? So good governance is defined as a system which delivers civil, social, cultural, political, and economic rights to all populations with equity. And decentralization is a step towards good governance. Now, decentralization as we define it is distribution of resources, power, or functions from one central location to different local levels. And decentralization is assumed to bring more participation of citizen voices. It says it increases accountability because if there are more voices, there will be more accountability to it. Political competition, this was an interesting thing in my research where I found that if there is one single party, they would have their own way in dealing with the populations, but if there are decentralized ways of working, they would have more competition and they would strive for better efficiency in the systems. It also regulates abuse of power because if it's central, then one single party has a whole, power on that. They won't be, they can abuse that power. There could be corruption in that. So decentralization is a step towards achieving good governance. Now coming to decentralization in India, over different countries in various parts of the world, we've seen decentralization being applied for various reasons, but particularly for India, it was aimed to improve the reach and quality of public goods. And the 73rd Amendment, which was adopted in 1992, was to bring the power from central government to different levels, which is district, which is akin to like county level here, and then sub-district, and then village level in rural areas, and this is called the Panchayati Raj system. I will focus my paper particularly on the village level, which is called the Gram Panchayat. Looking at particularly the case study of Haryana and Haryana Panchayati Raj Act, which was formulated in 1994, but it has gone through some amendments in 2015, which is what my focus would be. It has affirmative action policies, so there are some seats reserved for marginalized communities. Looking at two research questions, first is social inequality, a barrier in decentralization of power in India. How is that happening? And why has decentralization process at Gram Panchayat level not led to good governance in state of Haryana? When we assume that decentralization will lead to good governance and it's not leading to that, what is wrong with it? There are two underlying theories that I am going to engage here. First is decentralization approach, which I mentioned before, that it should increase participation, accountability, and transparency. And the second is based on Dr. Ambedkar's idea about how political democracy is a means to achieve social democracy. It's not an end in itself. Looking at Panchayati Raj institutions, the Gram Panchayat particularly, it's divided into Gram Panchayat and wards. So Gram Panchayat consists of like about 6 to 12 wards, and each ward includes about 500 voters. Gram Panchayat head is a sarpanch and the ward head is a panch. Dalits not being able to represent at each level, in such sarpanch level, at Gram Panchayat, at the panch level. And here, as I mentioned before, there's affirmative action policy available, and the district office decides the representation of marginalized groups, and even if there are certain selected Gram Panchayats where the sarpanch or the head is from the marginalized communities, there are other people from upper caste who consist of the rest of the Panchayati Raj institution, and they do not allow even the head of the institution, sarpanch, to function because they have social power. So political power is not the end in itself in this whole system. And sarpanch from the Dalit community is not able to function. For example, there have been many cases where in India, on a certain occasion like 15th August, the Independence Day, the Republic Day, the flag hosting is done, and we've seen that in various reports that the sarpanch who's supposed to do the flag hosting there is not allowed to do so. He's not allowed to sit, he or she is not allowed to sit on a chair in front of the rest of the upper caste members. So there are these aggressions. I would not call them microaggressions, they're macroaggressions. And they happen, and the system, in spite of the political system being in place, they are not able to function as a power there. Second, coming to false representation or proxy candidates, this is a very organic research that I have got from my own family, and I have spoken to my extended family, in-laws, and I've got this information from them firsthand, that how does proxy candidates are being put there, and the way it functions is, if a certain area is designated to have a sarpanch or a head from the marginalized communities, the whole village or the whole area would decide who would be the candidate. So if a population has about 60% upper castes and 30% Dalits, the Dalit sarpanch would still be selected from the whole population, not from one particular only Dalit population. So the representation, so the person who's the candidate will not necessarily have the interest of the whole community. And how this is also being played out, it's Dalit Women Speak Out. Yesterday there was this book mentioned by Jolie and Jeshri Mumbai. She has reported that how women from Dalit community, especially in those reserved seats, are pushed to be a candidate in front of another strong Dalit candidate, and they are seen as a proxy candidate, pushed through violence, made to stand on the election, so that they face another Dalit candidate and the votes are split. So this whole idea about building proxy candidates and false representation exists. Shifting of ward demarcation, especially in the way the political system works, the demarcation of wards decide whether that particular ward will have a Dalit leader or a representation or not. And it has been also noticed, and this is also an organic research, that the wards demarcation changes every time. And this ward demarcation is changed to split the Dalits into two different wards so that their representation doesn't come up. Presence of Khap panchayats, particularly in Haryana, I'm sure you all have heard about their notoriousness. And the Khap panchayats are basically caste panchayats, and they exist from a long time. And these Khap panchayats are parallel systems in the political system. So although they are not political, they are not elected, they have more power than the Panchayati Raj systems in Haryana. And there has been a biased focus on various schemes and programs, which is also clearly seen. The schemes and programs which are pro-marginalized communities is not being implemented in spite of being approved by the central government, because the power lies at the local level, where they don't want to take that initiative. There is a high vacancy of positions, as much as 40% at the sarpanch level, and so it's clearly we can see that in spite of these political systems in place, if the implementation is not done well, it doesn't really make a difference. There are certain new amendments in Haryana's Panchayati Raj Institution Act in 2015, and that goes with that any person who has not passed 10th grade, like high school, will not be able to stand for a sarpanch or a panch. And for a Dalit, SC, ST, scheduled scheduled tribe candidates, he or she should be 8th pass. And for women, especially for scheduled tribe communities, should be 5th grade. But there's another clause which says that he or she cannot stand for elections if he or she doesn't have a functional toilet at home. So I'm sure most of you know that how Dalits live or in the various communities in India especially, and Haryana is no different. That there is a very slight possibility of having a functional toilet at home. So this is a very systematic way of excluding the populations or the candidates who can be a strong representative and not allowing them to access that power. So now my question are these amendments, which are assumed to be really progressive in Haryana's Panchayati Raj institution, are they really regressive? So looking at few policy options, true decentralization should explore true representation, and it should be that Dalit candidates should be able to. The Dalit candidates should be selected only from the Dalit community. So Dalit community should have a say in who is going to represent them. The others should not be able to do that. There should be power checks and balances in the systems, that there is no abuse of power and violations. The schemes, which are particularly for the welfare of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe population, should have their representation at local level. No other caste should be involved in that. Because through research it's seen that if other castes are also involved in that, it doesn't work out. And either that or the central government should be there for implementing those schemes. There should be external evaluation of sarpanch and panch level work based on their work for marginalized sections. We know upliftment of the most marginalized is the upliftment of the whole society. So if that doesn't work out, they are not working. Assessment of these activities of Gram Panchayat according to pro-Dalit and pro-women lens needs to be really done. In conclusion, I would say decentralization is a great approach. It can do wonders, but it requires a strict and close analysis of how its effectiveness is being rolled out. Currently, decentralization has led to re-centralization of power in the hands of few elite members, upper castes, and that is what I'm arguing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Next will come Adiba Nasser, will be presenting secular Bangladesh redefined by systems now or never. Lord.
Oh.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Adiba Nasser. I'm from Bangladesh. I'm currently as a student of Heller. I'm very proud because I'm a student of a Heller society, a Heller cohort, where I have seen diversity in its extreme point, and I have seen how people could help each other, even not knowing which caste or which religion he or she is from, and people are able to just be so nice here. I'm just a proud student of Brandeis University, so I thank all of you, and especially Brandeis University, for organizing this conference. Today I will be talking about Bangladesh, secular Bangladesh, and a little question that I have about coexistence in Bangladesh. So what I'm going to talk about today is a thought process of mine which has been bothering me from last few years, and which I'm trying to work out by listening all of you, by listening what other countries are doing, and understanding our history as well. So I'll show you something in the beginning so that my question is a little bit clearer to you. So what current situation in Bangladesh and the definition of coexistence looks kind of like this, where we all live together and we enjoy together, we eat together, we play together, we are inviting even each other to our religious festivals, even non-religious festivals, but we're just not ready to mingle at all. There is somewhere a barrier which is invisible, and I don't know, I mean, I know, but I don't know if anybody else in the government knows or even wants to acknowledge that they know that there is an invisible partition. It always feels like these two puzzles down here, which like different parties try to mingle with each other, but at some point it gets stuck. So Bangladesh is a very small country, smaller than even the state New York, and but we have a Muslim majority population. So in Muslim, by majority I mean around 85% Muslim majority and 15% of all other religions, not only Hindu. Hindu is the next major religion in Bangladesh, but we have a huge Christian population, Buddhist population, and a lot of indigenous population as well, which we don't have a record. So all of us, we live together, and the education system is also kind of open in terms of the government, because government thinks that anyone can pursue any kind of education in our country, but the truth is there hasn't been proper education system for each group of people. Why I say this is because I was just talking to my friends from India yesterday and from other countries as well, from like Pakistan and Nepal, to understand that what kind of books they read when they are young at school. And it was interesting to see that only Bangladesh and Pakistan also has a book called Religion from class 1 to 10, which is compulsory for everyone, but never asked that which religion book I want to read. It's like the teachers will look at my name and will judge that I'm Muslim, and I'll be given a Islam religion book from class 1 to 10. And it's same for the Hindus and Christians. So when we were young, we were very interested to know what other religion books are saying, what is written there, because the books are designed for young children. They are accumulated with nice stories and nice pictures. But the pictures and stories are not mine, and I haven't heard those from my family. So I always wanted to know, and like my other classmates, we always wanted to know what's written in the other religious books. And we used to take them home to read, and we used to borrow them from friends, and we used to take them home to read, and our parents would be like, how dare you bring a Christian religion book in my house? And then we understood somehow, so we were very young and we didn't understand that what's wrong reading a storybook. It's just another storybook, because we didn't have the sense of religion back then. But then we realized that it was not appreciated and encouraged, so we started reading each other's religion books every year at school and not bringing them home anymore. From there, I felt a confusion that if this is the daughter of my father's best friend, and they're coming to our house every day almost, and we're dining together, then why can't I just read her book? And why is even she reading a separate book than mine? So the confusion arose. One of my friends, she was Christian, and she's a girl, and she wanted to take a class of agriculture, and that was only for boys. So not only in religion, there were other classifications of education which were not optional to take for everyone. Those were just given, like girls, they will only study home economics, and boys, they will only study agriculture and development. So these are just the examples I'm giving all of you to understand that the confusion we have from our childhood, which the society never tells us, but it's just given. Moving forward, recently the scenario of Bangladesh is like we exist, we coexist, but we don't mix exist. So the confusion I was talking about, that these children are growing up and they're being young, and now they're learning about the Wahhabi generation and the other Muslim majority countries generation, Muslim majority countries culture. Because the communication and the travel system has been upgraded so much, it has been easier for Bangladeshi population to go to other Muslim countries, like Saudi Arabia is the biggest one where like almost everyone from our families wants to go there once in a lifetime for the Hajj purpose. And now because the economic solvency has been grown, also people go to Hajj more than once and do Umrah more than once, and that's why they think that should be our culture as Muslims. So they try to bring that home, but when we are at home, we are actually Bangladeshis, which is a secular country and was born as a secular country in 1971, separating from Pakistan and before that separating from India. So we have a whole Indian culture, and socially we are Indians, but then it gets more confusing when we try to have Indian and Arabic culture together. So it raises the confusion of what is my actual identity. Am I Bangladeshi? Am I a Muslim Bangladeshi? Am I a woman of a Muslim family practicing Indian culture, but I actually should practice Arabic or Muslim, pure Muslim culture. So these recently have raised the, I don't know if any of you have traveled to Bangladesh recently. One day I was in a public bus, and I was going to work, and the bus was so full that I just had a little corner in the gate to just hang. I didn't have a seat. And the bus was full of women and men both, but I was the only woman not wearing hijab, and every girl, they were wearing hijab. And I knew many of the girls because we share this transportation every day, same time. So someday they will be wearing hijab and someday they won't be wearing hijab. So they were still confused of which identity they should take. And many of those women would just go to their offices and would take their hijabs out because they would feel that this is a comfortable place to not wear hijab, or a safer place to not wear hijab and not having people to judge her for not wearing hijab. Well, the case is no one would be actually judging or maybe saying anything to her, but it's just the confusion inside her, which is just, it makes her struggle to find her own identity right now in the society. And in the bus, I was struggling to understand that do I look very odd here, not wearing hijab, because the entire bus is full of wearing hijabi girls. But I also knew that this girl won't be wearing hijab because they are not practicing wearing hijab, they were just struggling with the identity. Recently, there has been a survey done by the UN correspondent of Bangladesh, and he published this, I just forgot, I just lost his name. He published this entire article in a daily newspaper that the quotation was very nicely put by him that right now Bangladesh says it's secular and coexistence, but you will not know the meaning of true coexistence if you don't come to Bangladesh, because it's really hard to understand right now what they actually are. Are they coexisting? Are they secular? Is this place prone to gender discrimination? Is this place not prone to gender discrimination? So that's the situation in Bangladesh right now. In the villages, it's even more extreme. In the villages, they have to work. So the women are counted as laborers for home. So one man can have multiple women, and the woman has to go to the field for working. But at home, when they're having visitors or having people at home, they are expected to be more religious and covered. But in the fields, they're not expected because they're working. So the confusion is there as well. If you think about a village, in the villages, it's even more open to mix with each other, because in the villages, Hindus and Muslims, they all stay very closely to each other. And in the cities, we also live closely because we don't have any option. The population is so much. But it's like we live in our own apartments, and it's not necessary to mingle with each other. But in the villages, it is necessary because of the work purpose. But even then, in the villages or in the cities, when they are mingling with each other, they make sure that the invisible curtain is there. They don't cross a boundary. where it comes to the entire discussion comes to religion. If one asks about another, like for example, we do Shab-e Barat and Ramadan. If another person from another religion asks that if I can come to you and share this religious food with you, then everybody feels should they not? Is it written anywhere that they shouldn't? What should we do? But maybe because it is a religious food, maybe we shouldn't share, but we share the general foods like breakfast and lunch, so should we share this? So the confusion is still there. So the existence theory has been really challenged in Bangladesh. The entire confusion is right now solvable only by the government, which is due for long, and that is there is actually no civil law where every religion and every religious identities people can come together and mingle. For example, the marriage law, the education care, the child care law, the divorce law, the property law, most importantly, are under religious acts in Bangladesh. So what I mean to say is, a Hindu cannot marry a Muslim in Bangladesh, or a Christian cannot marry a Buddhist in Bangladesh. More importantly, if they somehow manage to get married in any other country and come back in Bangladesh to live, they won't be able to divide their properties to their children, because it's a confusion that the children would get the property in terms of which religion, the mothers or fathers, because there is no common policy or law, legal act for that. And Bangladesh is a very small country, it's highly influenced by the government. So I'm not saying that it is going to be all perfect after a law, but a legal system can help at least reducing these confusions step by step. So I would like to conclude my discussion with this powerful speech that Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi recently have given in Bangladesh, that he was trying to build an education campaign also in Bangladesh extending from India. And what I loved most is when the journalists asked him that you're trying to extend education in Bangladesh, but which education? The madrasa level education, which is an entirely Islamic studies, the English medium education, or the Bangla medium education? Bangla is the national language for us. So his reply was, education is still the most powerful step, but this education cannot move from its objective and meaning. The objective is liberating human mind and its possibilities, connecting people to each other, questioning all odds, searching for answers, respecting and sharing each other's values, respecting secularism, and that is education.
And our last presenter would be Nidhi Sen. She will be presenting her paper, The Moral Imperative of Gender Just Personal Laws and a Uniform Civil Code in India.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dinar, and my fellow panelists for a very enlightening discussion. Unfortunately, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I will be essentially reading out a paper that I had written for one of my classes. And it essentially looks at the moral imperative and the need for gender-just personal laws, and looking at it in the context of debates around the Uniform Civil Code. And I just want to put a caveat, this is a highly political issue at the moment. I'm sure you all will have lots of questions and questions, and I would be more than happy to respond to them. So if all are equal before the law, then the law too is expected to be equal for all. That is not the case in India, where religious personal laws are allowed to govern marriage, divorce, alimony, property, inheritance, adoption, one that has long been a source of struggle among feminists as well as a source of acrimonious debate in the political sphere. The demand for a uniform civil code was developed within a nationalist framework that had a double agenda: improving the status of women and unifying different religious communities through a set of common laws. But much of the focus has been on the differences between religious communities because of the existence of the personal laws, rather than on the gender injustices that exist within each personal law. The polemics of the political debate has rarely revolved around the question of securing women's rights, which has either been underplayed or subsumed within larger political imperatives of majoritarianism and minoritarianism. As a result, the mosaic of personal laws, which are essentially sites of patriarchal oppression, have been the last to be subject to gender-just reforms. As far as personal laws are concerned, all of them without exception are ridden with problems of gender justice that have been repeatedly raised by feminist groups in the past decades. The problems are not just confined to the content of these laws, but extend to their foundational principles as well. To begin with, personal laws deny to women within communities the rights that the communities claim for themselves, the right to self-determination, autonomy, agency. There is a need to challenge the way in which women are sort of legally fixed to birth-based religious communities that curb and limit their life choices. Personal laws, through the rigid codification of dominant, religious norms and practices, regulate and sort of overdetermine the agency and opportunities that women can exercise over their lives in extremely key matters, such as whether they can escape an abusive marriage, the amount of alimony they can receive on separation, whether they can enjoy property inheritance, or whether they can even adopt children. This has a long-lasting impact on women's sense of self-worth as individuals in their own right, capable of making independent decisions and value judgments that are not weighed down by the collective pressures posed by centuries-old cultural and religious values and traditions. Further, personal laws are applicable to all members of a community by virtue of being born into that community. As a result, these laws do not allow any freedom to individuals who may be non-believers or believers who do not wish for their personal decisions to be governed by what they consider to be, discriminatory and violative of their fundamental rights. It is assumed or taken for granted that citizens are perforce born under personal laws. While the acceptance of personal laws has legitimized the legal space for minorities and religious communities in conformity with their religious injunctions and sacraments, it has also led to prejudicial practices that have undermined the equal position of women as individuals in their own right. For women, personal laws have proved to be highly discriminatory and one-sided, since it forecloses the possibility of consciously asserting their selfhood outside what has been decreed as customary law. Women's right to their own self-identity and religious affiliation remains circumscribed within cultural diktats and prerogatives of the self-proclaimed representatives of communities. The Shah Banu case of 1985 is a prime example how the rights of Muslim women to maintenance was trampled upon by patriarchal notions of rights, and that was almost like legitimized through the invocation of a certain interpretation of Islam by orthodox religious leaders. Maybe towards the end of the presentation I can tell you a bit about what was the controversy around the Shah Banu case and more specifics. Hence, the defense of personal laws on the grounds of upholding the freedom of minorities is problematic because it invariably undercuts women's rights to equality and freedom. Assertion of community rights has excluded and marginalized women's voices in the interpretation of religious codes, one that profoundly affects their way of being. It has limited the space of women to define their own identities outside the boundaries set by the dominant members of the community. Although there have been historical attempts at reform from within, involving the questioning of interpretation of religious texts, they have been met with limited success, particularly in terms of guaranteeing women's personal choices. Current attempts at reform flounder against entrenched patriarchal privileges and the institutional power of community leaders who set the limits on who can be agents of reform, how these terms of reform are framed, and what could be the strategies. As a result, proposals and struggles for gender reform within personal laws have either been watered down or curtailed or are simply not enabling for women. In this regard, while there have been progressive developments within Muslim personal law, and in reference to this, there are two really good cases, the Daniel Latifi and the Shabana Banu cases. I can also discuss that towards the end. How is that different from, say, the Shah Banu case? secured the post-divorce economic rights of Muslim women and curtailed the rights of a Muslim husband to arbitrarily issue talaq based on stipulation of strict conditions. In fact, the Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan has taken on the traditional Muslim clergy in the country by demanding that Shariat laws relating to marriage, divorce, maintenance be codified. It is claimed that there is a need for gender-just reforms in Muslim personal law based on Quranic values of equality and justice, in line with freedom of religion as stipulated in Article 25 of the Constitution of India, which is, communities are allowed to freely profess, propagate and practice their religion. And in fact, the Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan, they conducted a survey and they found that 92% of Muslim women oppose the triple talaq. I'll be happy to discuss that also towards the end. And just, like facts, while I was Googling, like triple talaq has been banned in 21 Muslim majority countries, including in Bangladesh and Pakistan. So just to put it in context. But the conservative clergy has resisted attempts at marital equality among Muslim women by claiming that the codification and banning of practices such as oral talaq, triple talaq, are tantamount to tampering with the Islamic way of life. This raises the important issue about the role of the state in negotiating claims for justice based on the rights of women as individual citizens and those of minority communities as self-regulating collective units. When minority groups argue that no reform should be imposed on them, they are making a valid moral claim. But this claim that no law should be imposed upon collections of individuals unless they are freely chosen ought to apply to individuals as well. The fact is that personal laws impose compulsory identities on women. Collective identities often take recourse to the non-interference principle but refuse to extend the scope to individuals, especially women within these groups. Therefore, the question that needs to be raised at this juncture is the possibility of creating cross-cultural gender norms against patriarchal oppression that can help secure the rights of Indian women irrespective of their diverse religious values and cultural ethos. This would require challenging the current wisdom and shifting the terms of the debate away from the polarizing dichotomies of nation, community, individual, collective, minority, majority, all of which have invisibilized women as a category of right holders. It is critical to extract the discussion of cross-cultural gender norms from the framework of comparative rights of religious communities to regulate their own personal laws and to recast them in terms of secular progressive laws that enable women to exercise their own agency. Only then can hierarchical gender relations be challenged, patriarchal authority be undermined, and the public-private dichotomy be eroded. The troubling nature of personal laws underscores the challenge of reconceptualizing categories of laws in a manner that allows women's interests and choices to be recognized and respected and not be subjected to the pressures exerted by community representatives. In fact, like Article 44 of the Constitution states that the state shall endeavor to secure for the citizens a uniform civil code throughout the country of India, implying that there needs to be a uniform base of constitutional values governing the customary diversity of all communities. So there is an urgent need to create an overlapping consensus. Okay, next up. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. I've talked a lot about, I think, the Muslim personal law, but I also want to bring up the fact about the Hindu Code Bill of 1955-1956. So in addition to personal laws being discriminatory against women, since they are based on an interpretation of religion that sanctions patriarchy and resists democratic egalitarian relations between men and women, both Jawaharlal Nehru and B.R. Ambedkar, who were the vanguards of the reform of Hindu laws, recognized what they considered to be, the extremely retrograde nature of Hindu social customs and codes that urged women to actually model themselves on these mythic figures of devotion and fidelity. So they introduced, Nehru urged B.R. Ambedkar to actually undertake the task of reforming the Hindu the Hindu personal laws, and he introduced the Hindu Code Bill. So they essentially three bills: the Hindu Marriage Bill, the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Bill, and the Hindu Minority and Guardianship Act. It fell short of a whole-scale and drastic reform in the face of fierce opposition from reactionary bodies such as the Hindu Mahasabha, as well as the the RSS. And there's a quote, even at that time, the President of India, Rajendra Prasad, there was a quote that he mentioned that this was so the RSS actually viewed the Hindu Code Bill as an atom bomb on Hindu society. Because, and it links up very well with the words of the then President Rajendra Prasad. He said, new concepts and new ideas are not only foreign to Hindu law, but may cause disruption in every family. So in a sense, even though these were, Ambedkar and Nehru wanted very progressive Hindu personal laws, they faced stiff opposition from a range of moderate and even extreme right-wing Hindu forces. So consequently, the Hindu Code Bill actually does not recognize the mother as the legal guardian, irrespective of the age of the child, and does not entitle the separated woman to marital assets brought in the husband's name during the time of marriage. So in a way, these really raise concerns about the nature of gender justice within Indian society and the extent to which women can lead a life of dignity, and how they're in every way hemmed in by these different customary norms. I'd just like to actually conclude. I think I'll pretty much conclude over here. And just in terms of, I would be more than happy to talk about the specific cases and what was the outcome of those cases. And I think the debate, in fact, very recently, the Supreme Court is actually going to be deciding whether personal law should be in conformity with the Constitution. And so what should I say? An affidavit is actually going to has been placed. And there's a Supreme Court judge which is actually going to decide whether constitutional protection should be given to religious practices. Constitution should be given to religious practices that are not in compliance with the fundamental rights. So there's a lot of current, lot of political debate and discussion, and there are different stands by different political parties, different groups, even within the Muslim community. You have, there's the Bharatiya Muslim Andolan, which has a particular point of view. You also have the Shia Personal Law Board that has a different point of view. The All India Muslim Personal Board has a different point of view. So there are a range of stakeholders, and it's going to be interesting to see what is the outcome of this. Thank you.